The little girl said, "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." The CEO followed her into the snow. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The snow was falling relentlessly on the city streets, covering everything in a thick blanket of white. As the wind howled through the empty streets, a little girl stood alone on the sidewalk. She was small, her clothes were worn, and her face was streaked with tears. She stared at the ground, her breath visible in the cold air, her small hands clutching the straps of her backpack. She was waiting for someone, but that someone hadn't come home. "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night," she said, her voice trembling. The man walking by froze. He was dressed warmly, his boots crunching through the snow as he stopped in his tracks. He looked down at the little girl standing in front of him, her face pale from the cold and her eyes filled with worry. He glanced around, hoping to see someone nearby who could help, but the street was empty. "What happened?" he asked, his voice soft, though concern was already creeping into his tone. The little girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She always comes home, but she didn't come last night. She promised she would." The man felt a pang of sympathy for her, though he didn't know what to say. He crouched down to her level, trying to calm the anxiety building in her eyes. "Where does she work? Maybe we can find her together." The girl shook her head slowly, tears threatening to fall once more. "She works at a big building downtown. She's a manager. She always takes the subway home, but not last night." The man's heart sank. This wasn't just any lost child. This was a child waiting for her mother, a mother who hadn't come home. He stood up, his mind racing. He could tell the girl was scared, and for good reason. It wasn't like her to be out here alone, in the snow, with no one to help her. "Do you want me to help you find her?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. The little girl nodded silently, and for a moment, they just stood there, the sound of the snow falling around them. The man looked at the girl's face, filled with a mix of fear and hope. He didn't know why, but something told him that he needed to help her. Without another word, he extended his hand to her, offering to guide her through the cold. She hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Together, they walked through the snow, each step crunching in the silence of the night. The wind howled louder as they moved forward, but the man couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an ordinary chance encounter. There was something more to it, something he couldn't yet explain. As they made their way toward the subway station, he glanced down at the girl beside him. She was trying to stay strong, but it was clear that she was scared. He wondered how long she had been waiting for her mother. Would they find her? And who was this mother that her daughter so desperately needed? As they walked through the snow-covered streets, the man couldn't help but feel the weight of the little girl's hand in his. It was small and cold, her grip tight as if she feared he might disappear at any moment. The sound of their footsteps was the only thing that broke the silence of the snowy night. She looked up at him occasionally, her eyes filled with questions that she couldn't quite put into words. He could tell she was frightened, but she didn't want to show it. She had already told him that her mother always came home on time. So why had this night been so different? As they reached the subway station, the man paused, glancing around. The station was quiet, the trains nowhere to be seen. The streets were empty, but there was a sense of urgency in the air. "Do you want to wait here, or should we go look for her in the building?" he asked, his voice calm but steady. The little girl looked up at him with wide eyes, her lips trembling slightly. She took a deep breath before speaking. "She's in the big building by the park. I think she forgot to call," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, understanding. The building she was talking about was one of the tallest in the city, towering above the park. It was a place filled with people who worked long hours, just like her mother. "Okay, let's go. We'll find her," he said, gently patting her hand. Together, they began the short walk to the building. As they reached the entrance, the man looked up at the sleek, modern building with its glass windows reflecting the city lights. He could feel the chill of the night seeping through his jacket, but it was nothing compared to the coldness that hung in the air around them. The little girl stood quietly beside him, looking up at the building with a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. She wanted to believe her mother was inside, that everything was okay. But something deep inside her told her that it wasn't. The man could see the fear in her eyes, and for a moment, he felt his own heart tighten with concern. "I'm sure she's here. Let's go inside and check," he said gently, offering a reassuring smile. As they walked through the door, the warmth of the building enveloped them, a stark contrast to the cold outside. The man approached the front desk and spoke with the receptionist, who immediately recognized the little girl. "Oh, sweetheart, your mom's not in her office tonight," the receptionist said softly, glancing at the little girl with sympathy. "She left earlier, but I haven't heard from her since." The man could see the panic rising in the little girl's face. She clutched his hand even tighter, her fingers digging into his skin. "She's always on time," the girl said, her voice cracking. "She promised me she would come home." The man's heart sank. He could see the desperation in the girl's eyes, and it made him even more determined to find her mother. He turned to the receptionist, who seemed concerned as well. "Do you know where she went after leaving here?" he asked. The receptionist shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't. But I'll try to help. Let me check with security." He nodded and turned back to the little girl. "We'll find her. Don't worry," he said, his voice steady, though his own anxiety was growing with each passing minute. They waited in silence as the receptionist made a call to security. The tension in the air felt thick, and the little girl seemed to shrink in on herself, her body language screaming of the fear she was trying to hide. She looked up at the man, her eyes filled with questions that he didn't have the answers to. He wished he could tell her that everything was going to be fine, but something told him that wasn't going to be the case. As the minutes passed, the sense of dread grew stronger. What if they couldn't find her mother? What if something had happened to her? The receptionist hung up the phone, her face slightly pale. "I'm sorry, but they haven't seen her in the building for hours. She left early today, and no one has heard from her since." The little girl's face fell, and she looked up at the man, her small hands trembling. "I knew it. I knew something was wrong," she whispered, her voice breaking. The man's heart tightened as he looked at her, his mind racing. He had promised her that they would find her mother, but now the situation felt like it was slipping out of their control. "Don't worry," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll figure this out. We won't stop looking." The receptionist watched them, her eyes full of sympathy. "There's a security team downstairs. They might have some footage or more information." The man nodded and gently took the girl's hand, leading her towards the elevator. As the door slid open, the little girl squeezed his hand tighter, her eyes wide with fear. The man felt a pang of guilt. He wished he could offer her more reassurance, but the situation was becoming increasingly worrisome. The elevator descended slowly, and the tension between them was palpable. When the doors finally opened to the security office, the room was dimly lit, with rows of monitors lining the walls. A security guard looked up from his desk, a look of concern crossing his face when he saw the little girl. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man stepped forward, trying to mask the growing unease. "We're looking for my friend's mother. She works in the building, and she hasn't come home. The receptionist said you might have some footage." The guard nodded and motioned for them to follow him. "We have surveillance cameras throughout the building," he said. "Let me see what we can find." He tapped a few keys, and the monitors flickered to life. The man held his breath, watching as images of the building flashed across the screens. The guard scrolled back through the footage, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. "Here," the guard said, pausing the video. "This is from about 6 hours ago." The footage showed the girl's mother, dressed in a professional outfit, leaving the building. She looked hurried, her face tense as she walked briskly toward the subway entrance. "That's her," the little girl said, pointing to the screen, her voice barely audible. The man leaned forward, scanning the footage for any clues. The mother's departure didn't seem unusual, but something about her hurried pace stood out. She didn't look back, and there was no sign of her returning to the building. The man's gut twisted with uncertainty. "Can you track where she went after that?" he asked the guard, trying to stay calm. The guard nodded and started typing again. "I can pull up the next video of her near the subway, but it's going to take a few minutes to load." As they waited in silence, the man glanced down at the little girl, whose eyes were still glued to the screen. Her face was a mix of fear and hope, as if she were clinging to the idea that her mother would somehow appear in the next frame. The man felt helpless. He knew the subway could be dangerous, especially late at night, but he had no idea what had happened after she left the building. The guard's fingers clicked on the keyboard, and a new video popped up on the screen. The footage was grainy, showing the street outside the subway station. There, in the distance, they could see a woman walking fast, but it was too blurry to make out any details. "Is that her?" the man asked, his voice tight. The little girl squinted at the screen, her small face scrunching up as she tried to focus. I don't know." The uncertainty hung in the air like a heavy fog. The man knew they had to keep looking. Time was running out, and the girl's mother was still missing. "Let's go to the subway," he said, his tone firm. "We'll find her, I promise." The little girl nodded, her face a mixture of hope and fear as they left the security office. The man's heart raced as they headed back into the snow-covered streets. It was getting late, and the city was growing quieter with each passing moment. They had to act fast before it was too late. As they walked toward the subway, the sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty streets. The little girl's grip on the man's hand had not loosened, and her eyes remained fixed on the ground ahead of her, as if she were desperately searching for any sign of her mother. The man glanced down at her, feeling the weight of her fear in the silence between them. Every minute that passed seemed to drag on, the uncertainty building with each step. They reached the subway station, and the cold air hit them once more. The station was nearly empty, save for a few commuters huddled against the cold. The man looked around, trying to keep his composure, though the feeling of dread continued to gnaw at him. "Let's check the platform," he said, his voice low but firm. The little girl nodded, her face pale as she followed him into the station. The fluorescent lights flickered above them, casting an eerie glow on the walls as they made their way toward the platform. The man scanned the area, his eyes darting from one corner to the next. It was nearly impossible to see through the haze of shadows and light. "Do you remember if your mom always took the same train?" he asked, turning to the girl. She shook her head slowly, her face troubled. "She usually takes the early one, but I don't know for sure," she said quietly. The man exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The subway was vast, and finding someone in a sea of passengers could be like finding a needle in a haystack. They stood there for a moment, unsure of where to go next, when suddenly, a voice came over the loudspeaker, announcing that a train was arriving in 2 minutes. The man looked down at the girl, whose eyes had brightened slightly at the sound of the announcement. "Let's wait for this train," he said, trying to sound reassuring. As they stood by the tracks, the minutes ticked by slowly, each one feeling like an eternity. The little girl shifted nervously from one foot to the other, her small frame stiff with tension. The man glanced at her again, his heart aching for her. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else too, a small spark of hope. The train finally arrived, and the doors opened with a hiss, revealing a few people already inside. The man looked at the girl, who was hesitating. "Do you want to get on?" he asked gently. The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She nodded, and they stepped onto the train together. As the doors closed, the train started moving, and the man could feel the weight of the moment. They were on a journey now, not just to find her mother, but to keep a promise. The train rumbled down the tracks, and the man glanced at the girl beside him. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he didn't know that for sure. All he knew was that he wasn't going to give up. The train ride seemed endless, the city passing by in a blur of lights and shadows. The man's thoughts were interrupted when the train came to a stop at the next station. People got off, and a few new passengers boarded. The man stood up, looking at the girl. "Let's check the next car," he suggested. They made their way down the narrow corridor between the cars, the sound of the train's wheels against the tracks a constant hum beneath their feet. When they reached the next car, they stepped inside. It was crowded, but the man's eyes quickly scanned the faces of the passengers. No sign of her mother. He felt the knot in his stomach tighten. The train made another stop, and more people shuffled on and off. As the train started moving again, the man stood by the door, his heart racing. He couldn't help but feel a growing sense of urgency. They couldn't keep going like this, not without finding some clue. Just as he was about to turn to the girl and suggest they get off at the next stop, something caught his eye. A woman, dressed in a coat similar to the one he had seen earlier in the security footage, was standing near the end of the car, looking out the window. She had her back to them, But something about her posture, the way she held herself, it was familiar. The man's heart skipped a beat. He took a step toward her, his breath catching in his throat. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice tentative. The woman turned slowly, and as their eyes met, the man's world seemed to freeze for a moment. She looked at him with surprise, but then her gaze softened, and recognition flickered in her eyes. "You're looking for me?" she asked, her voice a mix of confusion and relief. The man's heart surged. Are you her mother?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. The woman smiled faintly, but it was clear that she was exhausted. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to worry you." The little girl, who had been standing quietly by the man's side, rushed forward, her face lighting up with recognition. "Mom!" she cried out, running into her mother's arms. The man watched the reunion in silence, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and happiness. It had been a long journey, but they had found her. And in that moment, the world seemed to slow down, the snow outside the train window falling softly, just as it had when they first started this journey. The woman held her daughter tightly, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were filled with relief. The little girl, now in her mother's arms, seemed to breathe a little easier, her body relaxing as she nestled into her mother's warmth. The man stood back, watching the emotional reunion unfold. His heart swelled with happiness for the little girl, but also a deep sense of relief. It had been a long and uncertain night, and yet, here they were, together. "Thank you," the woman whispered, looking up at the man. "I don't know what I would have done without you." He smiled softly, shaking his head. "I just did what anyone would have," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. The woman's expression softened as she gently stroked her daughter's hair. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought something had happened to her, and I didn't know what to do. She's all I have." The man nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I know," he said quietly. "I saw the worry in her eyes. But now she's safe." The woman looked at her daughter, her heart full as she kissed the top of her head. "I've been working so much lately, I didn't even realize how much she needed me. I thought I was doing what was best for her, but I was wrong. She needed me here." The little girl looked up at her mother, her face lighting up with a smile. "I'm glad you're here, Mom," she said, her voice small but full of affection. The woman's eyes filled with tears again, and she pulled her daughter closer. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I promise I'll be here from now on. I won't let you down again." The man, still standing nearby, cleared his throat, not wanting to intrude on such a tender moment. But he couldn't help but feel moved by the woman's words. He had seen so many people in the city, consumed by their work, their ambition, forgetting what truly mattered. But this woman, despite her mistakes, was clearly doing her best to make things right. And he admired that. "I'm glad you two found each other again," he said softly. The woman smiled at him gratefully. "Thank you again. I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done for us." The man shook his head, waving her off. "No need for repayment. Just knowing she's safe is enough." The little girl, still nestled in her mother's arms, looked up at the man with wide, trusting eyes. "Are you going to stay with us?" she asked, her voice innocent and hopeful. The man chuckled softly, his heart warming at the question. "I think it's time for me to go, but I'll always remember this night," he said, offering a reassuring smile. The woman nodded, understanding. "I'm sure we'll cross paths again someday," she said, her voice calm and steady now. The man smiled one last time, his eyes lingering on the mother and daughter before he turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. As he stepped back onto the snow-covered street, he felt a strange peace settle over him. The city still seemed vast and overwhelming, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had made a difference. He glanced up at the dark sky, the stars barely visible through the haze of city lights. There was still so much to do, so much to discover, but for tonight, this was enough. He had helped two people find their way back to each other, and that was something worth remembering. The night carried on, the snow still falling softly around him as he made his way home, the weight of the day lifting from his shoulders with each step. The city, for all its noise and chaos, had shown him something real tonight, something worth believing in. And as he walked away from the subway station, the woman and her daughter now safe in each other's arms, he couldn't help but smile. Maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't so cold after all. As the man walked away from the subway station, his thoughts drifted back to the mother and daughter he had just helped. He couldn't stop thinking about the bond between them, how a simple act of kindness had brought them back together. It was a reminder of the things that truly mattered in life. The world was full of distractions, of things that seemed important at the time, but didn't really mean anything in the end. But love, family, and connection, they were the things that would always stay with you. The man took a deep breath as he walked down the snowy street. The cold air stung his face, but he welcomed it. It helped clear his mind. He had helped them. They had found each other again. And now, it was time for him to go back to his own life. He was just one small part of their story, but it was a part he would carry with him. As he turned the corner, he noticed a small cafe down the street, its warm lights spilling out into the snow. He paused for a moment, considering whether he should go in for a cup of coffee to warm up. It had been a long day, and he was exhausted, but something told him that he needed to keep moving forward. He had done what he could for the mother and daughter. Now, it was time to focus on his own journey. The cafe could wait. With a final glance at the building behind him, he walked away, his footsteps crunching in the snow. The city was still bustling, even at this late hour, but it felt quieter now. The noise didn't seem as loud, the lights not as harsh. Everything felt just a little softer. As he made his way home, he passed by the familiar streets and buildings, the ones he had seen countless times before. But tonight, they felt different. There was a sense of peace in the air, a reminder that even in the chaos of life, there was still room for good, for kindness, for connection. When he reached his apartment, he climbed the stairs to his door, the weight of the day finally settling in. He unlocked it and stepped inside, the warmth of his apartment welcoming him. He hung up his coat and kicked off his boots, his body aching from the day's events. But as he sat down on his couch, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. It had been a strange, unpredictable night, but it had also been a reminder of something important. That sometimes, the small moments, the ones that seem insignificant at the time, can make the biggest difference. He had helped a little girl find her mother, and in doing so, he had found something for himself too. A renewed sense of purpose, a reminder of the importance of human connection. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The next few days passed quietly, and life seemed to return to normal for the man. He went back to his routine, the weight of the events from the previous night slowly fading into the background. But every now and then, his thoughts drifted back to the mother and daughter he had helped, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in him. He had helped them find each other, and in doing so, he had found something for himself, a renewed sense of connection. It wasn't something he had expected, but it felt important. The days passed, and soon, the holiday season was in full swing. The city was alive with decorations, and the streets were bustling with people preparing for the festivities. One evening, as he walked down the familiar street near his apartment, he noticed a small flyer taped to the lamppost. It caught his eye, and he walked over to read it. The flyer advertised a charity event, an art auction benefiting underprivileged children. The flyer featured a picture of a gallery, with an invitation to support a cause that resonated with the man. He stood there for a moment, considering the idea. He had always enjoyed art, and the idea of helping children tugged at his heart. It wasn't long before he found himself walking into the art gallery that evening. The space was warm and inviting, with soft lighting highlighting the works of local artists. The sound of gentle conversation filled the air, and the atmosphere was one of quiet anticipation. The man stood at the entrance for a moment, taking it all in. It felt different from the usual events he attended. This was something more personal, more meaningful. He made his way inside, glancing at the art on display. As he walked through the gallery, his eyes caught on a painting of a mother and child. It was simple but powerful. There was a connection between them in the way the artist had captured their embrace. The man couldn't help but be reminded of the mother and daughter he had helped. He stood there for a moment, lost in the painting, when he heard a voice behind him. "I see you found my favorite piece," a soft voice said. He turned to find the woman from the subway station standing next to him. She was wearing a simple, elegant dress, and her smile was warm. The man blinked in surprise. "You're here?" he asked, a little taken aback. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, her eyes soft with gratitude. "This is where I spend my time when I'm not with my daughter. Art has always been a way for me to connect with the world." The man smiled, his heart lifting. It's a beautiful painting, he said. It reminds me of something I once read about family. She nodded, her eyes flickering back to the painting. It's a reminder of what really matters, she said quietly. Family, love, connection. The things we often take for granted. The man stood there for a moment, contemplating her words. He hadn't expected to run into her again, and yet here she was, standing beside him in this quiet gallery, a place that seemed to hold so much meaning for both of them. I'm glad we met, he said softly. I think it's made me realize that there's more to life than just getting through it. The woman smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. I think we both needed that reminder, she said, her voice full of warmth. As they stood there together, the sound of the auctioneer's voice began to filter through the room. The event was about to begin, and the excitement in the air was palpable. The man turned to the woman, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. I'll see you around, he said with a gentle smile. She nodded, her eyes bright. Yes, I'm sure we will. With that, they parted ways, the man walking out of the gallery with a renewed sense of purpose. The night air was cool, and the streets were alive with the sound of holiday music and the hustle of people preparing for the celebrations. But for the man, it was different now. The world seemed a little brighter, a little more meaningful. He realized that sometimes, all it took was a small act of kindness, a moment of connection, to remind you of what really mattered. And as he walked down the street, the city lights sparkling in the distance, he couldn't help but smile. Life had a way of surprising you, and he was ready for whatever came next. As the days went by, the man couldn't shake the sense of peace that had settled over him since the art gallery encounter. The holiday season was in full swing, and everywhere he looked, people were rushing around preparing for celebrations, buying gifts, and making plans. It was easy to get lost in the noise of it all, but for some reason, everything felt different this year. He found himself smiling more often, walking a little taller, and thinking more about the simple things, like the kindness he had shown to a stranger and the unexpected connection that had blossomed from it. One evening, as he was walking home, he passed by the little park near his apartment. The snow had finally stopped falling, and the streets were quieter than usual. The trees in the park stood tall, their branches heavy with the last remnants of snow. He decided to sit for a while on the bench near the fountain, enjoying the calmness that the night had brought. As he sat there, deep in thought, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find the woman from the gallery standing behind him, a smile on her face. I was hoping I'd find you here, she said, her voice light and warm. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to thank you again. The man stood up, surprised but happy to see her. It's good to see you again, he said, offering a smile. How have you been? Busy, she replied, sitting down next to him. But in a good way. I've been spending more time with my daughter, and it's been everything I needed. The man nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. It's amazing what a little perspective can do, he said. Sometimes we just need a reminder to slow down and appreciate what we have. Exactly, she agreed, glancing up at the sky. I've been so focused on work for so long that I lost sight of what was truly important. But now, I've found my way back. And it's all thanks to you, really. The man felt a warmth spread through him at her words. I didn't do much, he said modestly. You were the one who brought everything together. I just helped in the right moment. She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the streetlights in the distance. Maybe, she said, but it was more than just helping. You showed me that it's okay to let go of the past, to forgive myself, and to focus on the future. You reminded me of the things I've been missing. The man sat in silence for a moment, letting her words sink in. He had never expected to hear something so meaningful from her. He had simply tried to do what was right, but now he saw that it had meant so much more. I think we both needed that reminder, he said quietly. Sometimes, it's easy to forget what matters. But when we're reminded, it changes everything. She nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. I know exactly what you mean, she said softly. I'm not sure where life will take me next, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. The man smiled, feeling the same sense of hopefulness. That's all any of us can ask for, he said. They sat there in silence for a while, watching the city lights twinkle. In the distance, the sound of the fountain creating a soothing background. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right. The noise of the city, the rush of the holidays, the stress of everyday life. It all seemed so distant in that moment. All that mattered was the quiet understanding they shared and the bond that had been formed between them. As the night grew colder, the woman stood up, brushing the snow from her coat. "I should probably get going," she said with a smile. "But thank you again, truly, for everything." The man stood as well, offering a final smile. "Anytime," he said. "Take care of yourself." She nodded and walked away, disappearing into the snowy streets. The man watched her go, his heart light. There was something different about the way the world felt now. Calmer, more connected. It was as if he had found a new sense of purpose, one that didn't come from chasing after success or material things. Instead, it came from the simple act of caring, of being there for others when they needed it most. And as he walked back to his apartment, the world seemed a little less cold, a little more hopeful. Life, he realized, wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey, the people you met along the way, and the moments of connection that changed everything. Months passed, and the city continued its busy, fast-paced rhythm. But for the man, things had changed. He had found a new sense of purpose, one that went beyond work and routine. The encounter with the mother and daughter had unlocked something inside him. A deep understanding of the importance of connection, of being there for others, of showing kindness in moments when it was most needed. It wasn't about the grand gestures or the big moments. It was about the small acts, the quiet decisions to be present, to help when you can. Life, as he had come to realize, wasn't defined by the number of achievements or the things he had accumulated. It was defined by the relationships you built and the lives you touched along the way. As the seasons shifted, the man found himself visiting the small park near his apartment more often, the place where it all began. He'd sit on the same bench, sometimes alone, sometimes with a book in hand, but always in thought. One chilly afternoon, as the autumn leaves danced through the air, he saw her again, the woman from the gallery. She was walking with her daughter, her hand gently resting on the girl's shoulder. They were laughing. The sound of their joy carried on the breeze. The little girl looked up at her mother, her face glowing with happiness. When they saw the man sitting on the bench, the woman's face lit up with a smile. "I was hoping to find you here," she said, walking over to him with her daughter in tow. "How are you?" He stood up to greet them, feeling the familiar warmth of their presence. "I'm good," he said with a smile. "It's nice to see you both again." The woman looked at him, her eyes soft and full of gratitude. "You've made such a difference in our lives," she said, her voice sincere. "We're in a better place now, thanks to you." The little girl looked up at the man with a big smile. "Mom says we should invite you to dinner," she said, her voice filled with excitement. The man chuckled, touched by the offer. "I would love that," he said, feeling a warmth spread through him. "But only if you promise to share some of that joy you two have." The woman smiled and nodded. "It's a deal," she said. And so, they spent the evening together, sharing a simple meal, laughing, and talking about life. It was nothing extravagant, just a quiet evening spent in each other's company. But for the man, it was everything. As he looked around the table, he realized that this was what life was about. These moments, these connections. He didn't need to be the center of the world or to have everything figured out. What mattered was the people you met along the way, the kindness you shared, and the love you gave. The city outside continued to rush forward, but in that small moment, everything felt right. He was where he needed to be, surrounded by the people who mattered. And that, he realized, was enough. Life had a funny way of bringing the right people into your path at the right time. You just had to be open to it. And as the evening came to a close, with the little girl hugging him goodbye and the woman giving him a grateful smile, the man felt content. He had made a difference in their lives, but they had changed his too. They had reminded him of the simple, beautiful truths that often got lost in the rush of life. And for that, he would always be grateful. With a final wave, he watched them walk away, the warmth of their presence lingering with him as he made his way home. The world was still spinning, the city still bustling, but for him, everything had fallen into place. In this captivating tale, we delve into a heartwarming journey of a young girl and her mother, intertwined with the kindness of a stranger. This story unfolds like many millionaire stories, where the richness of human connection outweighs material wealth. As the man helps the little girl find her mother in the cold, snowy streets, it becomes clear that sometimes, The most profound moments come from unexpected acts of kindness. This narrative echoes the core message in many millionaire stories, that true wealth isn't just about money, but about the bonds we form along the way. The emotional journey takes the man on a path that reminds him of the importance of family and love, which is often overshadowed by the rush of daily life. Much like in other millionaire stories, where people discover what truly matters, he learns that being there for someone in need can change both their lives. As the man witnesses the mother and daughter's reunion, he reflects on his own life, realizing that in helping them, he had found something valuable in return: purpose. In this story, just like in countless millionaire stories, the power of human connection shines brightly. It's a beautiful reminder that wealth is not only measured by what we have, but by how we give to others. As the man leaves the gallery and reconnects with the mother and daughter, he is once again reminded that the most meaningful stories are the ones that are lived, not just told. These millionaire stories speak to the heart, showing that sometimes the simplest moments hold the most profound significance.